Hello, Symposiast. I'm Dr. Angela Puca, Religious Studies PhD and University lecturer, and this is your online resource for the academic study of magic, esotericism, paganism, shamanism, and all things occult. So today we will talk about a very interesting topic, talk about Thelema or Thelema, as people in the English-speaking world tend to say, in relation to the left-hand path from an academic and from a practitioner's perspective. But before I introduce the special guest with whom I'm going to have this discussion, I want to remind you that there are a couple of spots left in my online course that is going to launch next Saturday. Next Saturday is going to be the first lecture. Actually, there are a couple of spots left, so if you're interested in joining my very first and likely the only live online course that I will have on the topic, you will find the link in the info box and later in the pinned comment and in the bio everywhere. So thank you for considering. And now let's bring on our guest. Hello, Marco.
Hello, Angela. Good to see you again. And hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. So do you want to introduce yourself so that people, in case they don't know you, even though
Of
if
course.
they're interested in Thelema, they probably know you already, but just in
Yeah,
case.
unfortunately, I'm notorious, right? So, long story short, my name is Marco, and I've been a Telemite most of my life. In fact, I discovered Crowley in the 1990s, and when I was a teenager, and then I, seek out the initiation in the AA as soon as it was possible to do so, and then I was a member of Ordo Templarientis for a good period of time, and then I left in 2018. Those are both, orders, magical orders that Aleister Crowley either, started or basically, used to promulgate the law of Thelema. Thelema itself is, well, it's complicated. Is it a religion? Is it a magical philosophy? It's all these things together. Thelema has been my main practice, if not, I would say let's call it like my main practice my entire life. And in recent years, I've been organizing a series of courses and classes online. It all started with the pandemic, really, because we were all locked inside and we didn't know what to do. So I was like, hey, let's teach magic online. It's going to be fun. And it was kind of fun. It's been fun. And from those courses, my first book came out last year called The Aleister Crowley Manual, Thelemic Magic for Modern Times, which has been, I must say, both a critical and commercial success so far. Nice. And now it's been translated in Italian. This came out like a month ago. Oh, actually, a few weeks ago, actually.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah,
It's
with
good
Lo
to have
Scarabeo.
more things on Thelema in Italian.
Yeah, absolutely. Like,
We're
it's
both
getting better,
Italians,
to be
for
fair.
those who didn't know.
Yeah, we're both Italian, obviously. So to be fair, it's getting better. For all my criticism of OTO, the people in Italian OTO, they're doing quite a good job at finally translating and putting Crowley's material, Thelemic material, available in Italian. Now, also my book is available there. There's going to be a Polish edition coming up as well, so that's I'm quite stoked about that, and possibly more editions coming up. And I'm writing a second book, which will be out, I guess, next year. So, 2025. Yeah, next year. You're ready in 2025. Oh my God.
Yes.
Yes. So I'm writing it right now, and it's gonna be kind of like the second part. Like if the first book was really an introduction on Thelema and on focus on mainly on Thelemic practices, like what you need to do Thelemic magic, really. The second book will be a little bit more, let's say, maybe philosophical and mystical, and will be focused on the next step, which is on the knowledge and conversation with Holy Guardian Angel, which is a big deal in Thelema. It's one of the second main initiation, I would say. So yeah, that's who I am, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. This conversation started because of a comment that Marco made. Because as I mentioned earlier, I was promoting on social media my online course, which is my first online course. I'm very nervous because I've never done this. I know that lots of people have run online courses, but this is the first for me. So yeah, I was just promoting it, and part of the curriculum, if you look at on my website as well, there are also lectures on Thelema, and the entire course is on left hand path traditions. And so Marco interjected in a comment saying that Thelema is not left hand path. So I thought it would
I will be
be
honest, right? Like I really thought, like, should I leave this comment? Because unfortunately, Thelemites are known to be really annoying online, and I know I'm very annoying online. But then again, we've known each other forever now. It's been like what, over 10 years now. So I knew that you would take it in in good spirits, right? And in fact, you did. So that's why we're here today, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, I think that generally I'm used to criticism, to be fair, and but I knew that from you it wouldn't come from a place of just judging, but more because you had something to say about it. And so I thought, oh, that's interesting, because then I read your follow-up comment, and we can talk about that. And then it just sparked my, I just rang a bell, and I thought, actually, I think that we should talk about this, because you're not the first person to say this. As part of my course on the left-hand path, there's also chaos magic, and chaos magic is also classified by academics as left-hand path. But chaos magicians will say that it's not left-hand path. And I had this same conversation with, even though it was not meant to be precisely on that, on a previous interview with Phil Hind. People can recuperate it on my channel. And he said, "Oh, but chaos magic is not left-hand path." And then people can look back at it. I explained what the characteristics are according to the academic definition of left-hand path, and then he said, "Well, yeah, then it is left-hand path." So I think that it's that's why I think it's interesting to clarify the difference between an academic perspective when we define things and we define traditions, as opposed to a practitioner's definition. That is something that in anthropology of religion is called emic versus etic perspective. I know that it's a term that is mostly unfamiliar with the general public, but it's a term that we in anthropology of religion talk about a lot. And the emic perspective is the insider's perspective. So the perspective that somebody from the inside of a tradition will have. How would they depict their own practices? And the etic perspective is the perspective of the scholar, who's an outsider. In some cases, it can be an insider-outsider. But still, when they are working from an etic perspective, they are working as academics and as scholars, and using the methodology that is relevant to that kind of definition. And that would be the type of perspective that I provide on my channel, and of course on my courses. And so I thought that it would be interesting to explore these two perspectives on Thelema and the left-hand path. And those that have followed me for a long time will know, but I think that I need to reiterate it, because I always find comments of people that completely dismiss this from me. There are people that think that I think that the academic perspective is what people should do, and is absolutely not the case. Academia and academic research is descriptive, is not prescriptive. So our job is really to find the most accurate knowledge that we can find, and it's not prescriptive in any way. If you, as a practitioner, find useful to have the academic perspective on your tradition, or traditions that are tangent to yours, or others that you're interested in, that's fine. But what you do with that academic knowledge is completely up to you. I mean, academia doesn't rule over religious practices or magic practices. We just study and describe what's happening either in history or in the contemporary world, how people make meaning, how people construct the concept of efficacy around a certain practice. That's what we do. We don't prescribe how people are supposed to do things. This is one of the differences. Whereas for a practitioner, practitioners have different aims in mind. They don't have as a primary aim the accuracy of information. They are more concerned with the meaningful of the information, what kind of meaning it has. Also, they tend to care more about the usefulness of that information. I mean, what that specific word conjures to the mind of people in a specific time and in a specific era, as opposed to, is this term describing accurately what is going on cross-culturally, or in a specific culture, or in a specific time? The concern of a practitioner tends to be more about what they want to convey, how they want to portray themselves, whether what they are saying is effective. And there is a degree of prescriptiveness in what practitioners do, like saying, if I'm the leader of a tradition, I will want to tell you how to practice and what is the most effective way of practice. Whereas as an academic, I'm not concerned with that. I'm just concerned with providing the most accurate information. I will give you Yeah, sorry. I will just leave you to speak in a second. I just wanted to give an example from my own PhD research about this. How you can have a very massive divide between how an academic would describe something and how a practitioner would describe something. Now, as part of my PhD research, I have studied witchcraft and shamanism in Italy, right? And also how people would construct the terms shaman and witch. And there are Italian folk witches that would call themselves anything other than witch, because
Yeah.
in Italy the term strega has a negative connotation.
Mhm.
Now, doesn't mean that they are not witches just because they refuse to use the term, because and they don't refuse to use the term because they are not witches in essence. They refuse to use the term because they live in a society, in a time, and in a space where using the term will have negative repercussions, and also the term has negative connotations to the community that they have around them. But from an etic perspective, a scholarly perspective, we don't have any negative connotation associated with witch. We just understand what a witch is, what a witch does, and they fit completely that kind of description. So they are, to all intent and purposes, witches from an academic point of view. But they would be very offended if you would use the term witches for them. So how do you, as an anthropologist, resolve these contrasts? And one way that I do, and most of my colleagues do, is to acknowledge that, to say, these people, like just like I'm doing now, these people will not use this term. However, as a scholar, looking at the definition of witch and witchcraft and looking at what they are doing, this can be defined as
Yeah, yeah,
witchcraft.
absolutely.
So now, after you, I don't want to
And
do a
I think
monologue.
I would like to start with a question. In fact, so how do you define the left-hand path? Let's start with this benchmark, right? Like, what is the left-hand path for you?
Yeah, that's it's not for me, but I would
Or
say
for academia, like
yeah, best.
from an ethic perspective, right?
Yeah. So from the point of view of the scholars that have studied the left-hand path, and there are a few, there are also some resources that I've put in the description, as I always do, of my video on the my videos on the left-hand path. We have Granholm and Woodman and Sutcliffe that have talked about it, but there are other scholars as well, and even at conferences we talk about this. So the left-hand path is used as an umbrella term to define a set of traditions and practices that have certain characteristics in common. And these are the idea of individualism, the fact that they don't follow a central dogma, and even when they have a structure, the primary guidance is still the person. I mean, you as a practitioner are still the center of your practice. You may have some guidelines from a tradition that you're in, but you are the center. And individualism is the first one. Then we have the idea of self-deification. So the idea that in a certain way you can become a god. And this is conceptualized in a different way depending on the traditions that fall under the umbrella of the left-hand path. But you definitely find this across the traditions that are left-hand path. Then you have antinomianism, which is the rejection of the social norms. I mean,
Mhm.
social norms are considered something that for some of these traditions, they completely reject them outright. And they say, we just have to completely disregard social norms because they are just a chain. And we need to realize whether these social norms work for us or not individually. And then you have the idea of the appraisal of the here and now,
Mhm.
and also in a way a form of hedonism. The idea of that what matters is here now, is not an afterlife, is not something that is beyond this world. There is a full being in the here and now. So
Yeah.
these are all forms of magic that are completely embedded in the material world, even though there is an element of mysticism with the idea of becoming a god. But there is also a strong appraisal of the here and now, and not being somewhere else, not thinking about an afterlife, not thinking about another realm. And there are, of course, the idea of working with other realms, but still, what matters is the here and now. And in fact, the idea of the concept of the left hand path historically comes from Tantra, but
Mhm.
Tantra is very different. And in the Western esoteric world, it comes through Blavatsky. But Blavatsky had a very different idea of the left-hand path because it was black magic for her. So, that's why I'm not surprised that Crowley would say that it's not left-hand path, because the frame of reference that he had for the left-hand path was Blavatsky.
Yeah.
Whereas the frame of reference that we have now as scholars to analyze what is the left-hand path goes way beyond Blavatsky, and it just tries and understand what is the the definition and the different traditions that can fall under this umbrella. And the reason why academics at the moment, but there are always discussions about definitions in academia, the reason why I think it is a useful label, at least from an etic perspective, I'm not sure that it is useful from an emic perspective. I think that it is useful because there are definitely a cluster of traditions that have distinctively this set of elements. And you would think, oh, maybe all the esoteric traditions now have these characteristics, but it's not quite true, because there are other traditions that don't really fit this pattern. But you have certain ones that, even though they are different from each other, because obviously chaos magic is very different from Thelema, which is very different from forms of Satanism and so on, and Dragon Rouge, these are all very different traditions in their own right, but they do have those things in common, to the point where it feels useful to have that kind of category. But still, categories need to be challenged.
Yeah.
This is something that we do every time, we continuously in academia.
So basically, first of all, I would like to say right away that, since we established this benchmark, yes, Thelema is left-hand path then. I mean, absolutely, right? In the sense that pretty much all the points you mentioned there are found in Thelemic mysticism, in Thelemic magic, in Thelemic philosophy, right? In the sense that I would say that in Thelema, a lot of the individualism, the hedonism, are way less on the forefront than most people would think it is, especially because Crowley was definitely an individualist, was an antinomianist. He was a big hedonist, that's no denying that. But that was really like Crowley. When then we look at what Thelema is supposed to be studying, the holy books of Thelema, studying the practices, we realize that those elements are there, but they are not as, to the forefront. They're not as, shoved down your throat as you maybe would find in, I don't know, theistic Satanism, or, Order of the Nine Angles, or maybe even Dragon Rouge and things. I mean, maybe Dragon Rouge, I don't know. But let's say like more pop left-hand path traditions that are out there, right? They're there, but they're not as prominent. I also would like to point out the fact that even when we speak about Thelema is not as it's not like a single monolithic system as most people would think it is, right? In the sense that the Thelema that Crowley left us, yes, it is. It's single, it's monolithic. It is very much an attempt at a syncretic religion that has a strong emphasis on the practical side of things, like in doing magic, but also really is focused on Crowley as the as the prophet of Thelema, and so as the pretty much like the forefront, the figurehead, the mast of this ship, right? That is going somewhere at least, and this is the kind of Thelema most people will know if they join the most visible and easily reachable group, that is the Ordo Templarientis, or OTO, that really is focused on establishing and promulgating and expanding Crowley's Thelema. Now, I'm saying this because then if you look at Crowley's Thelema, so if you approach Thelema by joining the OTO and being exposed to Thelema as Crowley wanted it, then you will have to face the reality that Crowley, as you were saying, really did not see Thelema as left-hand path. In chapter 12 of Magic Without Tears, which is Crowley's last book, right? It wasn't really a book. It was a series of letters that he was writing to Anne Mackey, if I'm not mistaken, one of his last disciples. And I think it's really interesting because if you want to have like Crowley speaking of Thelema in his last days. So from my perspective, when he had the best understanding of Thelema, having lived it for 60 years, right, at that point, you read Magic Without Tears. Crowley is really fun in it. It's really, like, the reading is very engaging. It's way less stuffy than a lot of his other stuff. But in general, like, here you will find some important points that Crowley makes about the doctrine. And again, in chapter 12, which is called The Left-Hand Path and the Black Brothers, it clearly states outright Thelema is not that. Actually, Thelema wants to be the bastion against that. And he makes the point, for instance, by starting saying that when we think of, I'm paraphrasing, it's not verbatim, but it's more like, well, you, Karasora, because he always speaks with the disciples. So, dear sister, you've heard about the black magicians. Well, the black brothers of the left-hand path are way worse than the black magicians, because a black magician, a warlock, it's someone that just does, I don't know, magic to cause you harm. The black brother of the left-hand path is the adept that has obtained the knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel, so has achieved this quite advanced and very important initiation in the system of attainment. But they made the conscious choice of limiting their further evolution, so in many ways not becoming in service of humanity, which in Thelema, that's what the master of the temple, the Magister Templi, the adept fully realized is supposed to do. It's supposed to come back from his or their attainment and teach to humanity and be in service of humanity. Well, the brother of the left-hand path decided instead to renege that, say, no, I'm here, I'm in this for myself. And now, of course, it's way worse than the black magician or the warlock, because it has a much more deep understanding of magic and mysticism and can do serious harm, in the sense that, while in Crowley's ideas, and in fact, so again, in the idea of Crowley's Thelema, the warlock can just do little things, even if those little things, I don't know, is causing you warts and I don't know, making you fail your exams or things like that. Well, the brother of the left-hand path is the evil adept. Hitler would be the brother of the left-hand path, right? Like that level of evil, like that level of nastiness. That's the perspective in Crowley's Thelema, right? So as you were correctly saying, this stems directly from theosophy. Thelema is insane. Is super inspired by Blavatsky. Blavatsky was considered by Crowley to be a Magister Templi, so in many ways was considered to be one of these very advanced adepts that decided to to go to the highest level of initiation and then come back to be a teacher, a beacon of enlightenment for the rest of humanity. And so Crowley had considered Blavatsky to be one of those Magister Templi. And so Thelema is so inspired from theosophy that takes this idea of the dichotomy between left-hand path and right-hand path pretty much straight up from theosophy, right? So the right-hand path is the good adepts, like in theosophy, you have like the ascended master, Kuthumi, Agarthy, and then the left-hand path is Hitler, like Himmler, like the SS, like the evil magicians that are really there to cause insane amount of harm in the universe and in the world. Now, as I was saying, right, the truth is also that Thelema has evolved beyond Crowley. And famously, one pivotal moment in this evolution, and of course, in Thelemic circles, so in the emic perspective, we're still debating if this was a good thing, a bad thing. I'm a proponent that it's a good thing, with some caveats here and there. But in general, we have Kenneth Grant, right? Kenneth Grant was Crowley's last magical disciple. He was his secretary for a while, and Kenneth Grant is single-handedly the reason why, for instance, I am a Thelemite much more than Crowley, because as you were saying at the beginning, we didn't have much Crowley in Italian growing up, especially not in the 90s. It was, but we had
not sensible either, because it was
exactly. It has changed in the last 5 years, maybe. Again, thanks to the efforts of Italian OTO, and this is one of the rare cases where I'm actually speaking positively of the audio, but they did a fantastic job at translating things. But for the longest time, you only had Liber ABA, Magic in Theory and Practice. This a 76 edition from Astrolabio that was a bad translation of the 72 edition by John Simons and Kenneth Grant. And so that's all the Crowley we had for the longest time. Then we had Moonchild, but what we had were Kenneth Grant books, at least the first two. He wrote many books, famously the Typhonian trilogies. And Kenneth Grant, I'm telling you, I'm making this point because Kenneth Grant really tries to push the envelope for Thelema, right? To the point that to this day, a lot of people love his work, a lot of people hate his work. In Thelema, if you speak with most people in the OTO, so those who are really pushing Crowley's Thelema, they will say that Kenneth Grant is the worst thing that ever happened to Thelema. Most of them, at least, would say so. Because he really tried to innovate. He really tried to bring in new ideas, right? And he did that by trying to make sense of all the practical sides of Thelema. A big part of Thelema is, of course, sex magic. I mean, everybody knows that. Like a lot of people are drawn to Thelema because they think they're gonna join, orgies and whatnot. Spoiler alert: it does not happen. Let's not go there. It's way less glamorous than a lot of people think it is. Even sex magic itself is way less glamorous than most people think it is. But Kenneth Grant tried to make sense of this sex magic because he was one of the few that actually knew Crowley directly, had instruction from him directly. So he had a good understanding of what Crowley wanted to do with this sex magic thing. But he also was very aware that Crowley didn't really have his sources all sorted out well, because the idea of sex magic in Thelema comes from what Crowley understood of Tantra. And Crowley didn't understand Tantra very well because he didn't have many sources, to be fair. Famously,
I was about to say it wasn't even their fault because nobody was properly understanding Tantra or Indian tradition.
I think only in the last maybe 40 years we started to get better understanding of what Tantra really is, right? I mean, I always suggest everybody to read Christopher Wally's Tantra Illuminated. For me, was like groundbreaking reading because I was like, okay, I did things wrong for many years myself, right? Like even the understanding of Kundalini is not what most people think it is. Anyway, digress. But the point is that Crowley had some access to the sources. He did the best he could, and Crowley was really trying again to create a new syncretic religion magical system, right? Which, by the way, it's internally coherent. Like you can work with Thelemic system and you can get results. It works. But when you try to find out where these ideas come from, a lot of the traditional history that Crowley was proposing falls apart. Kenneth Grant tries to bridge that gap because Kenneth Grant had better sources for Tantra, not as good as we have right now. But for instance, he had connections with David Curven. David Curven was an interesting guy. There's this book edited by Henry Buchan called Brother Curven, Brother Crowley, that kind of like it's the interaction between the two. And Curven was was quite an adept at real Tantra because he spent some time in India at the time. We're talking the 40s in here. And it's fantastic because Curven chastises Crowley constantly, like, you think you know what you're talking about? You don't, right? It's really funny. Anyway, Grant had access to this guy, had access to other people. And basically, what happened there is that he realized that he could actually present Thelema as a left-hand path system by making the point that since Thelema is so based on sex magic, and since sex magic has its roots in Tantra, well, in Tantra, you have this dichotomy between Dakshina, Marga, and Vama Marga, so the left-hand path, sorry, the right-hand path and the left-hand path. And in the left-hand path is where, at least Grant understood at the time, the sex elements were more prominent. Nowadays, we know it's not this simple. It's definitely not this clear cut. But in the 60s, when Grant starts writing, and then in the 70s, when his books come out and get translated in multiple languages, including Italian, including Spanish, including French, including German. So those books get a much better distribution than Crowley's books were getting. That's where we start getting the idea that Thelema is left-hand path because pretty much Grant says so, right? So you see when I'm getting at this point. So when we look back at your description, so the way academics describe a left-hand path practice nowadays, if you tell me like that's the benchmark, I would say yes, you find all those benchmarks in Thelema. Then you go to the source and you'll say, Crowley will tell you, no, absolutely not, because we're trying to be the good guys. We're trying to create adepts and then masters that will be in service of humanity, because we're trying to reformulate the laws of humanity in a way that are more just and right for everybody. Thelema is very inclusive, despite a lot of Thelemites nowadays having very strange ideas, but Thelema is very inclusive, because possibly Crowley was a very I don't know. Should we say that Crowley was a queer person? Possibly. That's the right term to use, right? I would not call him a liberal, because he was definitely a high Tory, so he was very conservative in his views. But he was a queer person, and he was trying to make sure that the word, an ideal word under a Thelemic eon, would not be as oppressive to queer people like him the way he felt on his own skin. So in many ways, Thelema hits all these bits for a left-hand path tradition. But Crowley would have never said so, because he thought he was doing the right. He didn't see himself as Hitler. Right? That's the point. That's what I'm saying. And then, of course, things get muddled even more, because when Kenneth Grant comes into the fold, lo and behold, Kenneth Grant is definitely, it's in his books. You will read Thelema is a left-hand path. Like we are the left-hand path. We are the left-hand path, and it's like, how? Like Crowley spent like quite some time telling you that those are the most evil magicians possible. So I guess that what's interesting nowadays for me, from the emic perspective as a practitioner, is that nowadays we not only have to solve this conundrum, which is, I guess, it's easily solved. You just understand that you just understand the perspective, and you try to understand that every time you have this, every time you use a description, you have to be aware of the context you're using the description. What I say that right nowadays we have a further problem, in the sense that a lot of the left-hand path nowadays, I'm going to sound a bit judgmental, it's what the late J. Stratton Kent called dark fluff. In a sense, it's a series of practices that really have no meat to the bone. There's nothing there. It's just like it's very aesthetic, and it's very empty. Something that I noticed recently on social media, you can imagine like being, I don't want to say like a prominent Thelemite, but having written a book, people follow me on social media. That's what I'm going with. And a lot of these people, of course, are left-hand path practitioners, because, as we said, maybe they read Kenneth Grant and they think that's what it is. And then I read what they post, and I realize that there's really not much there. It's the same aesthetic. It's the same message as the girl boss messaging, like let's do this, let's believe in yourself, but instead of having angels and angel numbers, you have Satan and it's or you have demons, right? So there's really not enough meat there, whereby Thelema supposedly should have a little bit more meat. So that's where I'm standing.
Yeah, I think that it totally makes sense. And I also know that the left-hand path has also been associated with a certain political party, and that's another reason why people are not keen on self-defining as left-hand path practitioners. So it's as I said, I'm not really surprised, and as I said, academia is descriptive, not prescriptive. So it's not like I would suggest Thelemite, so you have to identify as left-hand path, because that's what the description that we have in academia. Practitioners can do what they find best, and academics do their job in defining things based on the accuracy, or the best accuracy that we can get at a given time. I think that there's definitely a massive influence from Kenneth Grant in the utilization of the left-hand path and the association with Thelema. Although, of course, it's not the whole story in terms of at least how academics describe Thelema as being part of left-hand path traditions. But I think that these definitions are also I never see definitions as monoliths because,
Mhm.
as we have seen, even from an emic perspective, the way that Crowley intended the left-hand path was very different from how Kenneth Grant intended the left-hand path. And the way both intended Tantra was different from each other, and they were both inaccurate in that kind of description. So I think that having descriptions is not, it's also not like a monolith, like it's always
Yeah.
going to be like that because things, of course, do change over time. And yeah, go on.
I mean, that's the way like science should be, right? Like, academia is scientific, right? You always try to have something that eventually is falsifiable, so that the ballpark can be pushed forward, and then
Yeah,
you can always.
that's what I like about being an academic. I think that often, not all practitioners, but there are some practitioners that really want to assert this is the truth, this is the way you have to do things. And I like the fact that in academia, we just say, knowledge is a moving target. We are going to provide you with the most accurate knowledge that we can gather at a given moment.
Yeah.
But surely in 10, 20, 30 years, what we're going to provide is going to be different because the methodologies at our disposal will be different, probably will give us more accuracy. Also, the world around us will have changed. And some could even argue that, everything around us changes. And
Yeah.
so the result that you get, even using the same methodology, might vary.
Crowley wanted to push this idea of scientific illuminism, which in many ways is, the scientific, the academic way, right? So, from my perspective, this is also why, for instance, I personally struggle with those Thelemites that, like you were saying, like one saying, no, we have the truth. This is Thelema. This is the doctrine. This is Crowley. What say we need to stick with it all the time because there's not only, for instance, we know as a fact, as you correctly mentioned, that Crowley's understanding of Tantra, which is how his entire system of sex magic derives from, it's faulty. It doesn't mean that it doesn't work. I think that magic works in practice and not in theory. This is a Peter Carroll quote. He famously say that magic works in practice and not in theory. And I like it a lot because in my experience, right, in my book, I write about what is called like mythical thinking. And the idea is that like you in magic, you really want to have a system that's internally coherent, a set of, you establish a myth, right? And you work inside the myth, right? Knowing, at least you should know, that it's not that the myth is the reality, it's the truth, because in many ways the truth is something that you only find at the very end of your initiatory path, and possibly, personally, that's my personal understanding, you only have glimpses of it while you're incarnated, while you're alive. It's something that really, it will be yours once you transcend this incarnation, once you transcend space and time itself. But the point is that as you try to get there, it's useful in many ways, it's needed to create a set of myths that can give you, from which you can derive some practices. But the truth is that, again, these myths should, my understanding, at least that's the way I present Thelema, that's the way I teach Thelema, should not be monolithic. Like, we should carry on. And again, then if you speak with a lot of other Thelemites, would say, no, that's absolutely wrong, because we have a doctrine. We have, if you do what you're doing what's called consensus Thelema, aka you're doing whatever you want, and that's not it. But at the same time, if you don't have, if you don't try to push the boundaries, if you don't try to go further, you never ever apply that scientific illuminism that Crowley himself wanted to have, right? Like that, Crowley really was trying to push as one of the tenets of Thelema. Famously, he said that Thelemites were striving for the method of science and the aim of religion, which is exactly what we said here, right? Like the method of science, maybe it is the etic perspective, the etic perspective, and the aim of religion is the emic perspective, like trying to marry them together. So yeah, I mean, like, look, at the end of the day, I do agree with you, right? From the perspective of using a very well defined descriptor Thelema is left-hand path. We are, we're individualist, we are antinomianist. There's an element of hedonism. I think a lot of people are losing it, unfortunately, but there's an element of that. And there's definitely the idea of self-deification, even if I would say in Thelema, the self-deification, it's not so much as like, I am God and, I do what I want. That's very different, right? For instance, I should mention it because that's something that for me was obvious, but of course I should mention it out loud. The main aphorism in Thelema is, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love and the will. That do what thou wilt is not do whatever you want, which is in fact the way a lot of left-hand path interpret it. Like a lot of left-hand path, which is, I'm thinking about, acid satanism, order of the nine angles, so those more extreme kind of left-hand path. But then again, also the ones that ignite the interest of a lot of those who look at it from outside. They say, no, I'm joining this because, fuck the police, I do what I want. The dilemma is the polar opposite. Do what thou wilt is an incredibly prescriptive, in fact, aphorism, because it means that you need to find who you truly are. You need to find it's not really like your true self. The self is another very loaded term. You bring then, psychological model versus spirit model of magic. But let's say you try to find out that spark of divinity that's hidden inside of you. That's both you and both outside of you. But that, because what you're really trying to understand is that true will, which in fact should be called pure will, which is the term that's found in the Book of the Law, in Liber Alva Legis, is completely transpersonal. It's not about what you, as Marco or Angela, want to do or what you think you can do. It's not even what the best version of Angela and Marco can do. It's being in finding that specific path where you were always meant to be, and that will lead you where you're meant to go, because it's about that divine spark you carry yourself inside yourself. So I would say maybe in this thing, the self-deification of Thelema, maybe it's very different from what you would find in other left-hand path traditions, because it's really not about do whatever you want. It's about it's many ways of like do only the right thing in every given moment, which of course
that's quite a few left-hand path traditions conceptualize the self-deification or the apotheosis in that kind of way. It's not like, oh, I'm the god of everything, obey to me. That's
I didn't know that, because I don't know if I ever told you, I was a member of Dragon Rouge for a while.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was member of Dragon Rouge from 1999 to 2003. And I was basically, it was in my flat in Rome that we started doing the meetings that eventually would lead to Lodge Sotis in Naples with Alberto Brandi.
Oh,
being yeah, I know. It's a small world, isn't it? Right?
yeah.
And so it happened in my flat in Rome. So I was a member of that. And the reality there is that eventually, Thelema was my path much more than Dragon Rouge was. But if I would say at the time, not so much the people that I knew in Italy, but a lot of the other people that I was in contact with in Dragon Rouge, a lot of them did see that's apotheosis, as in like, maybe one day we'll do the right thing, but right now I do what I want. Like but then again, it was like the late 90s, all metalheads, was a different time, simpler
it sounds
times,
like teenagers that just want to do whatever.
Absolutely.
Rebellious.
I was 22 at the time, and before that I was 21 when I'm 46 next week, so imagine how many years have passed in the meantime. So
you're a Gemini.
yes, indeed, Gemini. With Stellium in Gemini and Sagittarius rising. I'm just not saying anything else. Right? It's enough as it is. But yeah, I think in the end we agree. But it's nice to have these conversations, because you can make points that most of the times you never make, because maybe, I don't know, you could take it for granted. A lot of people never hear these conversations, right? Because a lot of people never. I would say that a lot of those who have interest in the esoteric, especially given last 6 or 7 years, if they're new to it, maybe they've been exposed to it mostly from TikTok, and then eventually, thanks to you and Dr. Justin Sledge and a few others, to better information. But for the longest time, it has been like hot takes on TikTok. So it's nice to try and have a little bit more of a deeper discussion about it.
Yeah, I think that's why it was important to have this conversation, both to clarify the different perspectives, and also I think another point that I'd like to make, and this is something that I've discussed with informants in my research as well, on a very different topic, and that would be the topic of spiritual versus religion, because you
Mm,
find that very often in the people that practice Stoicism, witchcraft, tend to say, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious. And they describe what they do as a form of spirituality as opposed to a form of religion. And as an academic, me and also other colleagues, obviously, we don't tell people what to do. But there's part of me that would really want for people to challenge to challenge that dichotomy, because religion is a social entity, is a social agent, and it is something that gets funding, that gets research, whereas spirituality still remains a subsection of religion.
mhm.
Even if you think about how it works in academia, when you have to get a research grant or a research proposal, or get to a department where you want to study, I don't know whether it's Thelema or some other historic practitioner, you still have to go under religious studies. So in a
Mhm.
way, I feel like the fact that people want to use the term spirituality is giving them less power,
Yeah.
less because they are submitting to the fact that the term religion belongs to the Judeo-Christian religions, and not challenging the fact that, which is something that scholars have been doing for a long time. But we don't have the support of the community of the emic perspective, because many say, "Oh, it's a spirituality is not a religion," whereas defining it as a religion would help redefine the term religion itself, which is much more of a political, a social
Yeah.
agent, and even an economic agent, even to give relevance and to give importance and research to these kind of traditions. But I'm digressing. So what was I saying? I was
I think
saying that.
I don't know, like if I can actually, say something on this, right? So I was one of those that for the longest time I would say I'm spiritual, I'm not religious, right? Then and this was like maybe like 15 years going like this, right? Like going through the AA training, Dragon Rouge, other things I did. Then when I joined the OTO really wants to establish Thelema as a religion. Now, Crowley was very ambivalent on this because Crowley at first really wanted to establish Thelema as a religion. I mean, by all means, if you look at it, Thelema is a religion, right? There's no doubts about it. If you look at all the various the markers of a religion, Thelema hits them all. You have a
Yeah.
central text, you have a prophet, you have practices. It's a religion. There's no doubts about it. Okay. Now, for the longest time, Crowley wanted to try and do that, and he wrote a Gnostic Mass. So he wrote a central communal ritual so that people could come together and have basically experimenting the mysteries of Thelema without being initiated, but so basically just receiving them in a passive way, the way the Mass, the Catholic Mass or the Christian Mass in general is does the same thing, right? And then through the OTO, most people will not know, the OTO is not strictly the magical order of Thelema. You don't really learn magic in the OTO. The OTO used to be a Masonic system. So again, something very different than magic. Magic and Masonry are two different things. That eventually got taken over by Crowley, and Crowley Thelemized it. But it's still very much like a fraternity that teaches via Masonic means, which again, it's kind of passive in the sense that you don't do it's not like you that do magic. You just like you go to various degrees where you are you are the recipient of the degree, and other people do the degree for you. It's almost like you are the talisman, and you are empowered in each of these degrees, right? But it's still passive, right? Whereby the magic you do in the AA, it's active, like you do something. Okay. Now, back to Magic Without Tears, like the book I was telling you before. There's another chapter, I don't remember which is right now, chapter 31. Chapter 31, I remember now, where it basically says, is Thelema a religion? And Crowley goes on to a rant at the end of his life to say, well, call it a religion if you need it. I don't know what good is going to give it to you, but in fact, I don't care, right? So you can read this two ways, right? You can read it in the sense that say that maybe like an old man in his 70s, almost dying, right? And say, you know what, do whatever, I don't care. I wrote so much, you decide for yourself. Or, and maybe where I'm leaning in myself, is that maybe he realized that while, as you correctly stated, it's undeniable that reappropriating the term religion would do us a great deal. There's so much baggage involved, and there's so much politics involved, and the people get really sucked into the politics of hierarchical structures and whatnot, that maybe you lose too much by doing that. And this is really is my experience, because when I was a member of the OTO, I was the poster boy. I really believe in it. I really thought that that was the way to go. And then I realized all the hierarchies problem, all the nepotism, all the issues. I was seeing something that I, as an Italian, as somebody who was born and raised in Rome, I was seeing the same stuff that was happening in the Vatican, right? On a much smaller scale, way less drama, way less horrible crimes. Still some crimes, but way less. But at the same time, that kind of convinced me that yes, it's true. Like reappropriating the term religion would do us a great deal. I don't know if we can. I don't know if we're I don't know if humanity is mature enough yet. So from a strictly, like, if you're interested in spiritual evolution, if you're interested in initiation, maybe you have to do it right now, where we're living right now in 2024. You have to live it outside the boundaries of religion, because in my experience, religion will always go back into a focus on community, and community breeds hierarchy, and hierarchy breeds nepotism. And then when you get stuck into these cycles, the focus on initiation disappears, because you're all focused about running the group, climbing the ladder, getting to the next degree, and making the system work. Then again, I'm very jaded because my experience in OTO hasn't been good. But circling back to your point, like if you ask me, are you spiritual or religious? I'm definitely both. But I wish we could be, I don't know, I wish we could be in 100, 200 years from now and see if we're able to finally solve this issue, because I think it's definitely an issue.
I think that my question back, perhaps a provocatory one, is that who says religion needs to be hierarchical? Who says that religion needs to be dogmatic? These are all preconceptions we have that shape religion after Islam, Christianity, and Judaism.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is a conversation that has been happening for quite some time in academia, including my supervisor. She has worked a lot and published on redefining religion and how we can help define religion in a way that is more encompassing. Because I think my whole point with that conversation was not denying the importance of spirituality, but rather saying that what people define as spirituality is perhaps religion. It's just not religion defined according to three religions. It's religion defined according to a much broader set of religion. Because if you have a belief system, I mean, we can talk about Thelema or about, I don't know, any other any other even spiritual practice. Given that it doesn't have to have a dogma and it doesn't need to have an institution unless you want to define religion according to the three monotheisms that we have just mentioned. If you have a worldview, a belief system, a set of practices, and any kind of idea of the divine that your practices are helping you interact with, whether it's internal, external, animistic, or whatever, why would it not be a religion? The only reason why it wouldn't be a religion is if you define religion according to Christianity, Islam, and Judaism.
But at the same time, a religion comes from Latin, religare, to bind again. Maybe religion needs that binding, needs that boundary, right?
Yeah, but it could also be like, it's a similar root than you find in yoga, in Sanskrit, with
right.
huge, which is uniting.
Yeah, united with God. Yeah. Or you could also say that religio is like binding again to the gods or to the divine.
Exactly.
Right?
So it really depends how you interpret it. Really.
You interpret that. Then again, it's all as I think the takeaway from today's discussion is that, you know, it's important how you describe things, because
Yes.
the way you describe things can break or make or break everything, right?
Yeah,
To
well,
get to
academics are incredibly annoying with descriptions. Like, if you
but
go to conferences, you could have like hours and hours on just describing one term.
no, but it's good. It's good to have this kind of conversation. So, you know, back to your point, like, could we have religion that could we move away from the way Abrahamic religions have described themselves? Yes, I think we could, and I think we should. Uh, do I think that we are ready for it? Um, my experience tells me that even something that like Thelema, that wants to be literally the next step, wants to be the next Ionic law of attainment, we haven't solved that problem yet, because when we look at our internal discussions, they're eminently based on, do we need do we need a Vatican, the OTO, or do we not need a Vatican? And the people inside the Vatican, the OTO, will say that that's the best thing ever. You like, to the point that actually they tend to be very aggressive and very dismissive of everybody who's outside. It's and double so everybody who was inside and then left, like me. So I think it's a problem of maturity. Like, we
Mm.
as human beings, we are not mature enough. We're not spiritually mature enough to finally have solved this problem, right? And I guess that, as always, we need time, and possibly even have the fact that we have the opportunity to have this discussion in such a free way right now. And then, you know, discussion like this can reach thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. That's great, right? Like, and so maybe, you know, the next generation over will be a step beyond us, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I really think that, if you ask me, like, are we gonna solve it in our lifetimes? No, I don't think so.
Mm.
I really don't. I think we're still, you know, let's look at it from a mystical perspective, right? Like, let's go from the way I see it as a Thelemite. Thelema brought in a new eon, a new law, a new magical mystical system of attainment 120 years ago. This is the 120th years since the reception of the Book of the Law. We've done very little steps ahead, right? When it's so interesting, because when you look back at the way people were writing about Thelema in the 70s and 80s, Robert Anton Wilson famously, they were saying, "Oh, you can see Thelema everywhere, because, you know, we had the Summer of Love, we have been like the free love movement, like liberalism is everywhere." Clearly, Thelema has done what they promised. If you look where we are today in 2024, we took a lot of steps back, right? Haven't we? So the reality there is that possibly we will have to wait a much longer time, even to see the fruits of this new law to be fully installed. Then again, if you want to believe in Thelema, right? But even if you don't want to believe in Thelema, I do think that for humanity to move beyond the yoke of the Abrahamic religions and the way they really worked for humanity for 2000 and more than 2000 years. I mean, Judaism for longer than 2000 years. You can't deny it. They shaped our culture for history, right? So possibly we will need a much longer period of time in order to detach and disentangle ourselves from those structures, who are, in my understanding and my opinion, very oppressive, very they just do not breed good spiritual environments. But here where we are right now, right? So fingers
Yeah, I
crossed.
think
Fingers crossed.
I think that I'm not surprised that in the OTO and even the way that Crowley designed Thelema, it very much resembles Christianity, because that was the frame of reference. I mean,
Yeah.
nothing is born out of a vacuum.
No.
So there was the cultural reference, the religious reference. So what do you do? I mean, when you're trying to create a new religion, you will try and you have certain ideas, what is that you want to give with your religion. But then when you have to create a structure out of it so that it goes out of your head and it can be shared with others, the only thing that you have at your disposal is whatever frame of reference you have.
Yeah.
So I think that even nowadays, people tend to have, especially in our, in Italy, in the UK. I think these are countries that are very Christian dominated, even just culturally, even when people are not particularly religious, as in Christians, but they are still very much culturally shaped by Christianity, and and that really also defines how you would do a ritual. Even the
Yeah,
idea of having a mass, it could have been something completely different, but you can't really create something out of
I don't
nothing. Things tend to evolve slowly and progressively.
Mhm.
So when you have a progress in a religious practice that is completely different from the frame of reference, it usually takes a long time
Yeah,
and several steps to achieve that complete severance from that frame of reference. But in the beginning, it's almost unavoidable. I mean, it's the same thing as saying, oh, they didn't understand tantra correctly because they didn't have the text. Well, of course they couldn't. It's the same with Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, that they clearly didn't have a good understanding of Indian traditions, but they also didn't have proper translations and
translation. Yeah,
proper
absolutely.
text. So it's totally understandable. But I think that to the point of spirituality versus religion, I think that one of my point was that I am aware that the left hand path now, if you look at the discourse online, it's there are a lot of edgy people that like to play with demons and people that are very right wing. But I think that there is a point where it might be worth asking, is it worth it for these people to dominate the narrative of what the left hand path is?
Absolutely not. That's my answer, right?
So
Uh, I,
that's why it might be worth to offering like a perspective that is not doesn't have any specific narrative of agenda in mind, like the
yeah, yeah.
academic one, that offers a more neutral perspective and say, look, it's not edgy teenagers.
You're right.
It's
The only thing I would say on that is I will preface this by saying well, I agree with you 100%.
Mm.
The only thing I would add to this is that I think it's also important, and you do it, but I've seen others not doing it, to always remind people that the academic, like again, the academic perspective is descriptive and not prescriptive. Because you know what I've seen happening. Again, you don't do it. What I've seen happening is that since, as I was saying before, a lot of people that have been exposed to the occult in the last few years, eventually they move away from TikTok and find better sources. Then maybe they hear the academic perspective from those who. I'm thinking about books here, not really about anybody who does it online. Everybody, all of you who do it on YouTube, they do a fantastic job, to be fair. But I'm thinking about books that maybe don't are not completely clear on this, and then these people read the books and then come back and say maybe to me, oh, by the way, you are this because I read on this book and you don't have a PhD, so you're wrong. And I was like, well, let's sit down and have a chat about that, right?
No, I think that I know who you're referring to.
I think you do as
And
well.
if I understand who you're referring to, I agree with you. And this is another thing that I always tell people: just because somebody has a PhD doesn't mean that what they are writing is more accurate. What you need to look at is whether something is peer reviewed, not whether the person has a PhD. If
Yeah.
something is peer reviewed, then yes, but there are literally people just get a PhD and then they talk about what they think and what they fancy. And just because, even myself, I mean, one day I might want to write, I don't know, a novel or something that is not academic. Just because
Yeah.
I have a PhD is not going to make it more authoritative than somebody who doesn't have a PhD. What
But
makes it more authoritative is when I publish peer reviewed. And this is
yeah.
something that you can check. So if something is published peer reviewed, then you do know that it has to follow a certain methodology.
Mhm.
But when you look at these people with PhDs who never publish peer reviewed, it's like, I wonder, how is that the case?
Why
Hmm,
is that happening, right? Yeah.
why? I wonder.
Yeah,
Bizarre,
but
very
you know what?
bizarre.
At the same time, the average person is not aware of these nuances, right? Like this is something that you only, even the concept of peer review. Like I don't know, maybe everybody in the chat knows what it means, but maybe some in the chat right now would say, like, I don't know what these two are talking about. What is peer review,
Yeah,
right?
I think the importance of peer review, I think, remarks the fact that I'm not the authority, because the peer review process is the process of scientific publication, which means that I have a research and I propose it to a publication, and then you will have one or two or multiples anonymous reviewers that are experts in the field that will evaluate whether your research has been well done, whether the methodology is correct, whether you have collected data properly, even from an ethical point of view, not just in terms of the correct methodology from a scientific point of view, but also the ethics is very important. When you do something academically, you need to follow very strict ethics, otherwise it will be completely invalidated. I was really terrified that I would do something wrong with the ethics. Like, you always have to state, I am a researcher, I'm doing this for this and purpose, otherwise your data is going to be invalidated during the peer review process. And then they will evaluate all of your findings, the data collection, the data analysis, and if all of this is correct, they will always still say you need to improve this, and that. And after a long process, then it will get published if your research is actually good. Now,
Yeah.
I've heard people saying, oh, I didn't get published peer reviewed because academia hate magic and hate people study magic. And it's like, no, they don't. And I personally had. I personally, no, I have had problems with the Italian academia when I had to publish peer reviewed in Italy. So I did have pushback on that. But, and there was a very interesting story that I could tell you about. But I ended up, yeah, because unfortunately, Italian academics, well, there's the reason why I moved to the UK for my PhD, because in Italy, you don't have any of the, I think now they are starting to do some research on this in Rome, La Sapienza in Rome, and the University of Turin. And I also went to teach in Catania. So there are a few centers here and there, but it's still in its inception. And so when I tried to publish peer-reviewed with the University of Padua, my research was sent to scholars in Italy that had no clue what I was talking about. And so there was one reviewer who rejected it on grounds that were completely unscientific. So what happens in this case? So that's why when people say, oh, I didn't get published because people didn't like my work, that's not how it works. I mean, if the reasons that you're given by the reviewer are not don't follow the academic standards, you can appeal to that. So I wrote to the editor a very angry email at 6 a.m. and I explained all the reasons as to why that review was unacceptable. And I suggested, obviously I cannot tell you who to send my my work to, but I would recommend somebody who has worked outside of Italy, because Italy just doesn't have experts in this field, and they don't quite understand that type of research. And sure enough, the editor, who's a ordinary professor at the University of Padua, agreed with me and sent it through a second round of peer reviewed, and now it's published. So when people tell me, oh, I don't get published because they just don't like esotericism and they don't like my research, it's not true. I mean,
you just have to go. You just have to go to the system properly. That's the reality of that.
It might be a pain in the behind, but because it's not easy, and if you have any self-esteem, the peer-reviewed process will damage it completely, because there, the job of the reviewers is to smash your work to pieces and say you should have done this better and this other thing better and you should mention this and this. I mean, even when they like it and they approve it, they will
it anyway.
Yes, it's just how it works. So you really have to build a thick skin.
I mean, like I said, like I'm not an academic, but after having done my first book with a proper editor and publisher, like I always thought that I could write decently. I don't particularly like to write it, but I know I could do it. Then now I know that I got better after doing my first book, because the editing was coming. The editor was like piling in things, and I can say like the book is 100% better because of those editing rounds, right? And so yeah, I guess that the point here is that if you want to present some information, not only you must have the information, but you almost must be sure that your information is supported by the data and it's not just resting on dogma and nothing else, right? But get back to what we were saying. before, is that I think it's important, and of course, we're getting there, that people that are not academics, and even people that are not practitioners, people that are just interested in these topics, understand that it's not just because somebody has a PhD knows better than anyone else, of course, right? And again, as I said, like, of course, you, Dr. Justice Ledge, I'm thinking about, everybody, all of you of the academic YouTube academics, you're doing a fantastic job because you're honest, and you are doing, not, you're constantly publishing great stuff, and we need more of that. I mean, at the end of the year, I posted one thing on Substack and saying that I was like doing a preview and saying that the occult, all the occult fad was disappearing, and only the academics on YouTube would remain. I think I'm right. So because we need that kind of structure in a way, and also
Yeah,
that
I think.
honesty.
Sorry, go on.
No, please finish.
I was about to say maybe one reason why people like us academics on YouTube is that we are not pushing any agenda. We're just really explaining things. And often, what you find with practitioners that have social media platforms, they tend to push their own worldview and
Yeah,
their own way of seeing things. Whereas in our case, we're just presenting what research says. It's like, that's what the research says about Kenneth Grant or Aleister Crowley. So it tends to be more neutral, and I think that in a world of social media where everything is incredibly polarized, having a neutral perspective
good.
is refreshing.
Yeah,
Because it's
I,
like then
I
you
agree.
can make it what you want of it.
No, I agree with you 100%. Well, I think we've done it. We agreed.
Yeah, we have fought and
Exactly.
terrible argument. I knew that. I mean, it wouldn't be, anything like that. But you can never know. But as I said, I also think that the perspective of practitioners is very important. So I'm not one to say. I mean, as I do anthropology of religion, so I really value what people think. I mean, and that's one of the things that sometimes it happens that practitioners think that academics should tell them things. Like when I was studying for my PhD shamanism in Italy, and I was going to different initiation processes, and because I did participant observation, and I would ask people, so what is shamanism? And they would say, oh, but you are the researcher, you should tell me. It's
I
like,
was like, well,
well,
that's not how research worked, right? Like, actually, yeah,
yeah, and or they would feel self-conscious about, oh, what if I give the wrong answer and it's not correct? And it's like, I don't care, but I want to know what is for you. I want to understand how do you define it. So that's why I say it is important how people define. It's not like I'm saying, oh, the way academics define it is the best and the only thing that needs to exist. Absolutely not. Even though there are more personal, even emotional, and practice and religious related reasons and cultural related reasons as to why people would define a term in a way as opposed to another, that is still incredibly important.
yeah,
Because even if you think about why Lester Crowley rejected Left Hand Path, we are getting so much information about Aleister Crowley's perception of the Left Hand Path, his influence from theosophy, his idea of magic. I mean, even just by his definition of Left Hand Path, we get so much information about
yeah.
his view. So it's not. That's why I say both perspectives are incredibly important.
No, I mean, you know what? Maybe in a few years' time we can write a book together from from the two perspectives. It could be interesting, right? Like, I'll
Yeah,
send you
that
an
would be.
email about ideas, right? That's
Yeah, that would be interesting actually. In Italian or in English?
but in English first, and then we translate in Italian because there's, as you know, there's not enough market in Italy. But things are changing, right? Because I can tell you, like my book has been selling well in Italian as well, and it's, I mean, that was surprising to me, right? That's like I did not expect that. It was like number one on Amazon Italy for a day only. I mean, of course, in the magic substrata of how do you say, like, the rankings, right? But hey,
Mhm.
I mean, that means that people are buying it. I mean, I'm completely positively surprised, I must say. Well, do we have questions? How do we go from here?
um, Yeah, I think we'll probably wrap up soon. I was just about to say that speaking of publications, I'm working with scholars from the University of Turin. We're going to
Okay,
publish the first academic book on paganism in Italian for Mondadori.
that's
So I,
amazing. Okay, see,
yeah,
see, 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 possibly,
there's
finally,
progress.
yeah, exactly. You know what we should do? Huh. Should go back to Pagan Pride Italy, in Rome at some point, right? So for those of you who don't know, me and Angela met at the Pagan Pride Day in Rome
Yeah.
many years
Yes.
ago. First time. We were much younger, and you're still young. But anyway, like you know that there used to be like little conferences on the grass. Can go back and do academic emic versus etic perspective at Pagan Pride Day. You know what? That could be good. An idea.
Yeah, that would be a great idea. And I never shared it on my channel, but personal sharing. But the first time that I went to Pagan Pride, I was a teenager, and my parents forbid me from going there. I didn't know any people in the community in my surrounding area, and I basically just what's the term? Scappare di casa. I can't remember how to say it.
You just ran away from home.
Yes, I ran
That
away from home, and my mom said, "If you leave to go to that place, never go back again." And I said, "Okay, mom," and I just went to Rome, um, and I actually met the first pagans and practitioners that were in Naples, but in Rome because
that's
yeah,
crazy.
but
I always thought
yeah,
that you
but
guys were coming together from Naples, so that's no, you just met there.
mhm.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, but then if anyone was worried, I would then reaccepted them home, like, even though there was
Yeah,
no certainty of that.
Italian moms tend to be very dramatic with that.
Dramatic.
Yeah, exactly. But then they just love you anyway. It's true.
Yes. So I don't see many questions. Thank you guys for the super chats and thanking us for the conversation. Do you if you see any question, just point it out to me because
I'm not seeing any
um,
either. I see people had a
I
lot
see a
of
lot of
discussions,
comments.
a lot of which is great. Thank you all for listening to our our rambles, which is always nice to have them, right? No, okay.
Yeah, and sexual magic mainly comes from PB Roundful. Yeah, I have a video on sex magic. It was introduced in Western historicism,
And I
but
agree. It comes from PB Randolph, but where does PB Randolph get it from? Like, where does the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor gets it from, right? So,
yeah,
and by the way, what Crowley was doing is not exactly the same as Randolph was doing. There's no animation of the statues, for instance, in Thelema, but there is the creation of the homunculus, the moonchild. So, if we're gonna go into little details there.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't see any questions. I think they were just happy to. Oh,
yeah.
somebody's asking. Yeah, there's a question. Have you ever read Simon's Necronomicon? Have you ever read Simon's Necronomicon?
Do I really have to answer that?
Well, I mean, I've done a course with Peter Levenda, and I'm doing a
Mm.
retreat with Peter Levenda. Yes, I
Oh,
read it.
cool.
I read it, and I know the person that knows Simon very well. So he will be the first person to say that it's not the real Necronomicon, but it's a system, and it's definitely uh, not really Sumerian, but it's definitely something that works. It's
Mm.
maybe the Simon Necronomicon. Maybe it's one of the most successful chaos magic grimoires ever put there, because it's definitely not what it tells you it is, but it works from a magic perspective. So you have
Yeah,
a
I think that's important because there's nothing wrong with making up something new as long as you acknowledge that it is new.
yeah.
Um, I think that we can probably wrap it up here.
Yeah, I think so as
Um,
well.
is there anything that you want to tell people before we wrap up? Where can they
Oh,
find you?
yeah, I mean,
Obviously, get your book.
yeah, I mean, well, exactly. If you're curious about Thelema and you want to learn how to do magic, you can buy my book which is called The Lester Crowley Manual, Thelemic Magic for Modern Times, or Il Manuale di Aleister Crowley in Italian. And you can find it everywhere. In Amazon is the simplest way to get it. My website is marcovisconti.org, my name.org. And over there, you will find information on all the things that I offer. I offer a series of courses. So yeah, if you're curious about what I do, you can find me there. And on social media, like I'm trying to detox from social media as much as possible. But in general, like if you look for Marco Visconti on Instagram, on Twitter, whatnot, that you'll find me. And if you have any questions, you can reach out.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you, Angela. I really appreciate it. It was a great discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, guys, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. Obviously, I look forward to reading your comments. So please leave them. And don't forget to smash the like button if you like this video and share it around so that the symposium can grow and people can understand more about the difference between an academic and a practitioner's perspective. Also, if you're interested in learning about the left-hand path from an academic perspective, there are still a couple of spots left in my very first online course. Very nervous, very excited. You'll find the link in the description box. And yeah, you also find all the ways to support my work if you wish to do so. I would really appreciate it. And thank you all so much for being here. I hope that you all stay tuned for all the academic fun. Bye for now.